Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Brave Cowboy, An Old Tale in a New Time, by Edward Abbey. Narrated by Sellon-Wright. Ballad of the Brave Cowboy. Come sit here beside me, and I will relate the tale of a cowboy and his terrible fate. His name it was Burns, and he came from the East. No more would he say to man nor beast. He worked for his wages on a Magdalen spread, $1 a day, beef, beans, and bread. A tough, dirty life, and death in a ditch, hard on the kidneys, bad for the itch. A man might get suntanned, he wouldn't get rich. Like all brave cowboys, dead and alive, on riding and wind and stars he could thrive, with a homemade song to keep his heart alive. Burns was skinny and dark, and he kept most alone. He had only one friend, a kid named Bone. Together they rode and together they fought, when they got to town and drank a lot and bluffed each other, shot after shot. Like all good cowboys, dead and alive, on fighting and grit and blood they thrive, with a little strong whiskey to keep hope alive. One day in the fall came orders for battle, 25 men against 5,000 cattle. The sky was yellow and the sun was red when the drive started south for the town of Mordred. We knew by the signs we were in for some fun. The wind screamed high, the dust devils spun, and 5,000 longhorns started to run. Like all dumb cowhands, alive and dead, on trouble and sand and cactus they fed, and on payday a little brown girl in bed. It was thunder and hell when the herd broke loose. A man was safer with his head in a noose. We got them turned, but too strung out. They kept on running and came right about. Young Bone rode the drag and got lost in the dust. Rode his horse in a hole, and a leg got bust. He scrambled around and looked for the fray. Saw 10,000 red eyes coming his way, saw 20,000 hooves coming for pay. He tried to run, he tried to crawl. Nothing he did was no help at all. He liked to have prayed, but could not recollect the words that his mother had tried to inject, and it looked for sure his career was wrecked. Oh, all brave cowboys, dead and revived, God only knows how you ever survived, or stayed out of hell with souls unshrived. Now Burns rode the point and saw his friend's danger, came galloping up like a Texas Ranger. He hauled the kid up while his horse danced around, and the herd roared close on the rumbling ground. They tried to get clear, but it was too late. They were surrounded by bellowing hate, and the panicked horse completed their fate. The scream of that horse was an awful sound when the crazy herd rode them all down and kicked and rolled them over the ground. Like many poor cowhands, alive and dead, they never had a chance to die in bed, or even get their prayers said. When the herd was stopped and the dust blew away, we found their bodies mixed with the clay. The kid had a home in Texas named Blair, where we shipped what was left of his hide and hair. But the cowboy Burns we buried right there. Like all brave cowboys, dead and alive, on riding and wind and stars he thrived, with a homemade song to keep his heart alive. With a song to keep alive. A prologue. There is a valley in the west where phantoms come to brood and mourn, pale phantoms dying of nostalgia and bitterness. You can hear them shivering, chattering among the leaves of the old dry mortal cottonwoods down by the river. whispering and moaning and hissing with the wind over the black cones of the 5 volcanoes on the west. You can hear them under the red cliffs of the Sangre Mountains on the other side of the valley, whining their past away with the wild dove and the mockingbird, and you may see one, touch one, in the silences and space and mute terror of the desert, if you ride away from the river, which in this barren land is the river of life. The Rio Bravo comes down from the mountains of Colorado and the mountains of Santa Fe and flows into the valley, passing between the dead volcanoes on the west and the wall of mountains on the east. The river flows past the cornfields and mud villages of the Indians, past thickets of red willow and cane and scrub oak, through the fringe of the white man's city and under the 4-lane bridge of his national highway, beyond the city and the bridge and past more mud villages, more cornfields. The river flows beyond Thieves' Mountain far to the south and vanishes at last into the dim violet haze of distance, of history and Mexico and the Gulf Sea. But the river is haunted. The city is haunted. The valley and the mountains and the silent desert are haunted, troubled, vexed by ghosts, phantoms, and vagrant spirits. You can hear them down along the river, shaking and whispering in the leaves of the old cottonwoods. If you go there, you must hear them. Or out on the West Mesa, around the black craters of the volcanoes. Phantoms hissing and moaning with the wind. Or up there among the red cliffs and pinnacles, in those immense gulfs of space under the mountain's rim, where the air is cool and sweet with the odor of juniper and lightning, where the mockingbird and the canyon wren and the mourning dove join with the phantoms in their useless keening. And out on the desert, away from the river and the valley, far out beyond the volcanoes, you may see one whirling and whistling like a devil up some dry rocky wash, snapping the brittle lances of the yucca with the violence of its hate. It was into this valley of ghosts and smoke and unacknowledged sorrows that the cowboy rode, one morning in October not so many years ago. Part 1. The Cowboy. Riding in from the desert to the west, coming from God knows where. Chapter 1. He was sitting on his heels in the cold light of the dawn, drawing pale flames through a handful of twigs and dry crushed grass. Beside him was his source of fuel, a degenerate juniper tree, shriveled and twisted, cringing over its bed of lava rock and sand. An underprivileged juniper tree, living not on water and soil, but on memory and hope, and almost alone. To the north, across the rolling mesa of lava, there was a broad scattering of junipers, perhaps 2 or 3 to an acre. But here, where the man squatted before his fire, there was only the one, and south and west of the 5 volcanoes there were none at all. Nothing organic but a rudimentary form of bunch grass and the tough, spiny yucca. The man coaxing his tinder into flame was not much interested in the burnt-out wasteland around him. Occasionally he would glance to the southeast and toward the city several miles away, stretched out like a long gray shadow on the other side of the river, or would take a look at the chestnut mare limping among the black rocks beyond the wash, its 4 legs held stiffly together, its iron shoes scraping on the stone. But for the most part he concentrated his attention on his small, sprightly fire, and when he did look away from it, his hands continued their work of breaking and adding sticks of wood. After a while, when the fire had been built up to about the size of a small frying pan, and a residue of glowing charcoal had accumulated, he lifted a canteen from a branch of the tree, filled a small smoke-blackened pan with water, and pushed it lidless halfway into the bed of the fire. He watched it closely for several minutes, waiting for the first globule of superheated air to appear on the bottom of the pan. As he waited, he broke a dead stick into short lengths and laid the pieces carefully on the embers. A cool morning, even in the sunlight. Surfaces exposed to the sun were becoming warm, but the air remained chill and sharp, as though the sunlight passed from source to object without heating the intervening medium. The bubble appeared. The man reached out toward the juniper and pulled a wrinkled, beaten old cavalry saddlebag close to his heel, unbuckled its one remaining strap, and removed from the interior a black skillet, battered and ancient, then a cylindrical tin labeled Handyman Tube Patching Kit, a can of pork and beans, a punch-type can opener, and a slab of salted mutton wrapped in a greasy back copy of the Duke City Journal. The mare on the other side of the wash was staring toward the river, flexing her soft, rubbery nostrils, twitching her ears. There was a dim fragrance of tamarisk in the air, and a tension and electricity in the old, aching silence. The man wiped his nose once on his sleeve, sniffing a little, then unwrapped the mutton, opened his jackknife, and sawed several strips of meat into the skillet, which he set directly on the fire. A dimple in the bottom of the skillet reversed its curvature with a sudden ping, like a plucked violin string, making one of the slices jump. He wiped the blade of the knife on his jeans, closed it, and put it back in his pocket, while the meat sizzled and smoked in the skillet. He opened the can of beans and poured them over the meat. The gluey mess spread steaming around the mutton strips, spluttering against the hot metal. By now the water was simmering in the open pan, its surface beginning to vaporize. The man unscrewed the lid from the tube patching kit and emptied a certain amount of a brown granular material into the water, measuring by eye. Instantly, the aroma of hot coffee graced the air, and an involuntary smile appeared on his hungry, lean face. Within 5 minutes, everything was ready, or ready enough, and ready almost simultaneously. The coffee cooked and diffused densely through the boiling water, the mutton fried, the beans hot and smoky. The man began to eat, using his fingers for the meat, scooping the beans from the skillet with a sawed-off tablespoon and gulping down the scalding coffee in quick, short draughts direct from the pan. When he was finished, he leaned back against the bowl of the crouching juniper, wiped his mouth on the back of his hand, and sighed contentedly. After a moment he pulled at the yellow string dangling from his shirt pocket and drew out a small white cotton sack of tobacco. He reached in the pocket, groping with thumb and forefinger, and found a packet of wheat straw cigarette papers. He took one of the papers, thin, brown, not gummed, and holding it delicately between his thumb and middle finger, half rolled to form a trough, he opened the sack with his other hand and tapped out some of the cheap, arid, pulverized tobacco onto the paper. He tightened the drawstrings of the sack with a hand in his teeth and put it back in his shirt pocket. Then, with the thumbs and forefingers of both hands, he rolled the paper around the evenly distributed tobacco, moistened the edge of the paper with his tongue, sealed it, and gave one end of the somewhat oblate cylinder a half-twist. Without a further glance at his work, he stuck the cigarette between his lips, scratched a match on his boot sole, and lit it. Drawing, tasting, releasing the first mouthful of smoke, he stretched out his long, thin legs, relaxing, and stared at the city beyond the river. Stared at it from under the brim of his black slouch hat, his head tilted back against the tree, the hat pushed forward and almost down over his eyes. The attitude of his head and hat, the gaze from narrowed eyes down past the flanges of the nose, the cigarette jutting at an acute angle from his mouth, made his stare seem disdainful, unconsciously arrogant. He was a young man, not more than 30. His neck was long, scrawny, with a sharp Adam's apple and corded muscles. His nose, protruding from under the decayed brim of the hat, was thin, red, aquiline, and asymmetrical, like the broken beak of a falcon. He had a small mouth with thin, dry lips, and a chin pointed like a spade, and his skin, bristling with a week's growth of black whiskers, had the texture of choya and the hue of an old gunstock. The young man smoked on in contemplative silence, staring at the city. He seemed to be thinking as he sat there in the sun, the juniper growing out of his back and neck. Every line, fiber, bone, and muscle of his body bespoke repose, the assured, unself-conscious tranquility of a sleeping hound. His hands, big and long-fingered like those of a flutist or a good plank-stacker, and hard brown leather-skinned, rested like a pair of lifeless tools on his lap, on his groin and genitals. Every now and then a puff of blue smoke drifted out from under the hat brim, from an apparently immobile mouth and throat. But despite the appearance of a complete somnolence suggested by the relaxation of his body, there were indications of an internal activity discernible at 2 points. The eyes. Deep in the grotto of darkness formed by the tilted hat and the high ridge of the nose, the 2 eyes, like instrument dials of the mind and emotions, registered thought, perplexity, a faint hairline trace of anxiety. He spat out what was left of the cigarette. On the other side of the river, miles away, the city lay waiting, stirring faintly, but in silence, vague wisps of smoke and dust, glints of reflected light from moving objects, a motion of shadows, not yet fully awake and too far to be heard. In the early morning light, viewed from the west by the man sitting against the juniper, the city appeared as an undifferentiated patch of blue and gray shadow, edges ill-defined, southern and eastern extremities invisible, all blended with the vast wings of the shadow of the Sangri Mountains. The river, curling beyond and below the edge of the lava flow, was hard to make out from that distance and elevation. Here and there he could see strips and sheets of opaque water, but mostly nothing except the ragged fringe of vegetation crowding the banks and islands and old channels of the river. The silence was intense, burning, infinite. He could hear the silence, or what seemed like its music, the singing of the blood through his ears. Far to the southeast, from the direction of the giant military air base adjoining the factory, came the shattering roar of a jet engine. The sound rose, drove like an iron wedge through the sky, scoring the air with its transparent vibration. Then retracted, faded, died, and the vast silence closed in again, and sealed its perfect dome over the desert and the river and the valley. The young man leaned away from the juniper, bending the hinges of his long legs, and stood up. He was over 6 feet tall, with about 2/3 of that altitude composed of attenuated fuse-like legs. He spread the ashes of the fire with his boot, kicked sand over them, buried the bean can under a rock, and scattered the coffee grounds. The skillet and spoon he scoured with a handful of sand and packed back into the saddlebag. He rolled his light, mummy-type sleeping bag into a hard, tight bundle, tied it, and laid it across the saddle on the ground. Then he looked for the mare. The mare was watching him now. She stood about 50 yards away in the rocky draw, ears alerted, black tail swiping at a horsefly, shaking her black shaggy mane and watching him. A 3-year-old, well-muscled and close-coupled, with slender hocks and a glossy chestnut coat. She had good, wide-apart eyes and a stiffly arched neck, and her name was Whisky. "Whisky!" he called. "Here, girl!" The mare's ears went back. "Here, girl!" he called, and lifted the bridle and reins from a branch of the juniper. The mare eyed him suspiciously, not moving. He reached down into one of the saddlebags and found a small withered yellow apple and held it in the air, baiting the horse. "Come here, Whisky," he called softly. "Got something for you." The mare shook her head, watching him, swept a fly from her haunch and stamped at the sand, but did not step toward him. He shrugged his shoulders wearily and walked toward her, eating the apple as he went. He saved the core and, when he had advanced to within a few yards of the horse, tried again to tempt her. "Whisky," he called gently, proffering the apple core. "Here, girl. Come here, girl." This time she responded, lurching toward him awkwardly with her hobbled forelegs. The man smiled and stepped to meet her and fed her the apple core from his palm, holding her head against his chest and whispering into the tense ears, "That's a girl. Now you're getting the idea." He rubbed her face and forehead and patted the strong, nervous neck. "You're a good girl, Whisky. You're not so dumb, little girl. No siree, you're all right." While he was murmuring into her ears, he started slowly and stealthily to slip the bridle on, but she resisted, jerked her head up, and tried to back away. Quickly he jammed his thumb inside her cheek, forced her mouth open, and inserted the bit, pushed the headstall over her ears, and fastened the throat latch. "Easy, girl, easy," he said, as the mare laid back her ears again. He caressed her neck and thumped his fist on her powerful shoulder. After a moment he half-knelt to unbuckle the Mormon hobble around her shanks. The mare trembled when the strap slipped off, but made no trouble. "That's a girl," he whispered. He straightened up, holding the hobble in one hand, passed the reins over her neck, and quickly, smoothly pulled himself up and astride her bare back. For a second the mare stood rigid, frozen in outrage. Then, before he could put a spur to her, she leaped forward as it stung, stopped suddenly, arching her back with convulsive violence, and left the earth in another mighty leap, came back down and hit with braced legs, a sickening, bone-jarring shock. The man on her back gasped through his grin, shook his head, and leaned forward and clutched at the mane with one hand, twisting the strong hairs around his fingers and wrist. "Come on, you bitch!" he shouted, and whipped the mare across the flank with the leather hobble. She sprang forward again, bucked once, twice, then broke and ran. Laughing and cursing, the man turned her with a touch of leather on the neck, kept her turning round and round in a tight circle until she began to tire a little, then brought her at an easy canter back to the campsite, stopped her short, and slid off. He cradled the mare's head in his arms and talked low-toned, soothing nonsense into her quivering ears, while the dust they had raised went drifting by to settle again on different ground. When she seemed quiet enough, he spread a pad on her back and threw on his saddle, an old, worn, all-purpose outfit with a double rig and rolled cantle. He caught the cinch ring swinging underneath on the other side, and pulled it up and passed the latigo through it a half-dozen times and jerked it tight. The mare was holding her breath. He deflated her with a pair of good driving punches to the belly, drew the latigo tighter, and secured it on the tongue of the ring. After this, he hung on the saddlebags and fastened them, tied the bedroll on behind the cantle, and looped his almost empty government canteen close to the saddle horn. He had still more gear to attend to, a guitar and a rifle laying on the ground in the shade of the juniper. The rifle, a .32 caliber lever-action carbine, went into the scabbard slung under the fender on the right side of the saddle. The guitar he slung across his back by its braided rawhide cord. All was ready now. The mare waited impatiently under her firm burden of metal and leather, waited for the man's approach and the springy pressure of his long weight on her back. She had to wait. He seemed in no hurry now after completing his preparations. Instead of mounting, he stood facing the east and the city, slouching comfortably over his backbone and pelvis, thumbs hooked in the pockets of his jeans, the black hat tilted forward over his eyes. The sun was now an hour higher in the sky, a good 10 feet above the violet crest of the mountains. The shadows contracted, creeping back, and the first miasmic shimmer of heat waves began to obscure the detail of rocks and brush. Between the man and the river, a spinning dervish of air and sand, like a translucent tornado, danced across the plain with the weightless, buoyant grace of a moving spotlight. At its base, the tumbleweeds bounced around and around like figures in a square dance. The mare pawed at the sand, jerking her head nervously, and the leather gear on her back creaked and rustled. The most reassuring and satisfying of sounds, that agitation of used, worn, familiar leather. The man heard it, turned, caught up the dragging reins, put a hand on the pommel, his foot in the stirrup, and swung up into the saddle. The mare was already facing the east, the river. He touched her with his spurs, and she started off, breaking almost at once into a trot. He pulled back a little and kept her at a brisk walking gait, heading not for the center of the city, but toward the northern tip of its elongated trunk. Mounted and armed, he rode for the city, the slanting blaze of the sun twinkling on the butt-plate of the rifle, the silver buckle, the spurs, touching with fire the brief puffs of dust rising up from each step of the horse, glistening on the smooth hide of the mare's shoulders, thighs, operating muscles. The man himself, in his worn, dusty clothing, did not reflect much light. In the full glare of the morning sun there was something shadowy and smoke-like about him, something faded, blurred, remembered. He gazed straight forward as he rode, apparently indifferent to the vast sweep of desert around him, the sky singing overhead. The 5 volcanoes to the south, lined up like old ruined tombs, swung slowly around on his wheeling horizon. Riding into the brush of greasewood, live oak, mesquite, he flushed a covey of quail. They rose in unison from the desert floor, shrilling and fluttering, flew ahead for a distance and dropped in unison to the ground again. When he rode up to them, they rose into the air again, flew ahead and dropped into the brush, still in front of him. He ignored them, thinking of something else, his eyes under the shadow of the hat fixed intently on the vague complex of the city. His course brought him to an arroyo, whose sandy bed he followed for a mile or more until it veered too much to the south. Under the arroyo's banks, on the fine drifted sand, he noted the delicate hieroglyphics of field mice, lizards, gophers, jackrabbits, quail, and buzzards. But in the light of day only a few lizards appeared, swift and rubbery and insignificant, to watch the passage of man and horse. When the arroyo turned, he rode up out of it and across the lava rock again, through scattered patches of rabbit brush and tumbleweed, until he came eventually to a barbed wire fence, gleaming new wire stretched with vibrant tautness between steel stakes driven into the sand and rock, reinforced between stakes with wire staves. The man looked for a gate, but could see only the fence itself extended north and south to a pair of vanishing points, an unbroken, thin, stiff line of geometric exactitude scored with a bizarre mechanical precision over the face of the rolling earth. He dismounted, taking a pair of fencing pliers from one of the saddlebags, and pushed his way through banked-up tumbleweeds to the fence. He cut the wire.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?